The monthly HOA meeting was worse than Jack expected. He had prepared a reasonable presentation with photos and property records, but Regina barely let him speak. "The board has already ruled on this matter," she interrupted, rapping her gavel sharply. "Your continued trespassing is becoming a legal liability. We've documented multiple violations." Several board members nodded in agreement. Jack felt like he was talking to a wall. "This meeting is adjourned," Regina announced when Jack tried once more to make his case. The room quickly emptied, leaving Jack standing alone with his carefully prepared documents. The sun was setting as Jack drove the long way home, his mood as dark as the gathering clouds. As he rounded the final bend toward his property, a familiar red vehicle caught his eye. Vernon's ATV was parked right at the edge of Jack's fence line. Vernon himself stood on Jack's side of the fence, snapping photos with an expensive camera. He moved from the barn to the pig pen, documenting everything. "What are you doing on my property?" Jack called out, parking his truck. Vernon turned, not a hint of shame on his face. "Gathering evidence. Your animal enclosures violate county code. Too close to the property line." He pointed to a measuring tape he'd stretched along the ground. Jack opened his mouth to argue when a loud, irritated bray cut through the air. Daisy the donkey was trotting toward them from the barn, her ears pinned back in annoyance. The other two donkeys followed at a distance. Vernon ignored the approaching animal and returned to his photography. He carelessly tossed his camera into the ATV and reached for his notebook, not noticing that Daisy had stopped beside his vehicle. The donkey's past made her nervous around loud engines and strange men. Vernon had left his keys in the ignition, and the ATV was still rumbling. Daisy sniffed at the vehicle, clearly agitated by the noise. What happened next occurred so quickly that Jack could hardly believe his eyes. Daisy grabbed the tow rope hanging from the back of the ATV with her strong teeth. With one powerful jerk of her head, she pulled the vehicle off its brake. The ATV began to roll, slowly at first, then gathering speed down the gentle slope. Vernon shouted in alarm and lunged for it, but slipped in the mud from the afternoon rain. "No, no, no," Vernon yelled as the ATV rolled directly toward the pig pen, gathering mud along the way. Jack ran forward, but was too late to stop what came next. The expensive vehicle crashed through the flimsy outer gate of the pen and sank deep into the muck. Vernon, in his desperate attempt to save his prized possession, had launched himself after it, landing face first in the mud and startling the pigs into a squealing frenzy. The following Monday, Jack sat in a modest office in downtown Pinewood, clutching Eleanor's photos. Across the desk, attorney Sarah Martinez studied them with a frown. "The good news is you have a strong case for a prescriptive easement," she explained, setting down the photos. "Your family has openly used that road for over 60 years without objection. That creates a legal right to continue using it. So I can just keep driving on it?" Jack asked hopefully. Sarah shook her head. "The bad news is proving it in court takes time and money. We're talking several months and thousands of dollars. The HOA knows this. They're counting on you giving up." Jack's shoulders slumped. His savings were limited, and his remote job paid well, but not enough to fund a lengthy court battle. "I'll think about it," he promised, tucking the photos back into his folder. When Jack returned to Thornton Ranch that afternoon, he found an unwelcome surprise. A heavy metal gate now blocked the dirt road, adorned with multiple "No Trespassing" signs in bold red letters. A uniformed security guard sat in a small booth beside it. "Residents only," the guard said when Jack approached. "I need to see your Pinewood Estates ID." Jack had to reverse and take the long way around, using an old logging trail that added nearly an hour to his journey. The rough path damaged his city car's undercarriage, and he arrived home frustrated and late for an important video meeting with his team. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation worsened. Jack's daily commute became a nightmare. The logging trail turned to mud after a rainstorm, becoming nearly impassable. His boss started noticing his tardiness to morning meetings. The animals grew anxious with their feeding times constantly changing. Eleanor brought over a freshly baked apple pie and more bad news. "Regina's been talking about reporting your pigs to the county health department," she warned. "Claims they're a public nuisance." That night, Jack sat on his grandfather's porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. He scrolled through his phone, looking at job listings back in Seattle. Maybe fighting wasn't worth it. Maybe he should sell the ranch and return to his old life. A soft bray from the barn caught his attention. Daisy, the oldest and most stubborn of his donkeys, stood at the fence looking at him. His grandfather had rescued her from an abusive situation years ago, and she still bore the scars of her past. Yet she faced each day with determined dignity. "You're right," Jack said to the donkey. "We're not giving up that easily." Jack stood frozen for a moment, taking in the bizarre scene before him. Vernon was struggling to stand in the deep mud, his designer clothes ruined and his face unrecognizable under a layer of brown muck. The ATV was sinking deeper by the second, its engine sputtering and dying. The pigs, after their initial fright, now seemed curious about the strange visitor in their pen, sniffing and nudging at Vernon's legs. "Don't just stand there," Vernon shouted at Jack. "Help me get my ATV out." Jack was about to move when he noticed something on the neighboring hill. Eleanor stood with her professional camera mounted on a tripod, capturing the entire scene. She gave Jack a small wave before continuing to film. "This is your fault," Vernon sputtered as he finally managed to climb out of the pen, leaving deep footprints in the mud. "Your dangerous animal attacked my vehicle. I'll sue you for everything you've got." Jack bit back a smile. "Your vehicle that you parked on my private property while trespassing. The same property you've been trying to keep me from accessing." He glanced at Eleanor, who was now packing up her equipment. "I wonder what the sheriff would think of these photos." Vernon's face went pale beneath the mud. Without another word, he stomped away down the road, leaving his precious ATV behind. The next morning, Jack was fixing fence posts when his phone began buzzing nonstop. Text messages, calls, and email notifications flooded in. Confused, he opened his email to find dozens of messages from strangers with subject lines like "Go Daisy" and "Hero Donkey takes down HOA bully." Jack found the link everyone was sharing. Eleanor had posted a 3-minute video on social media with the caption, "Local HOA bully gets what he deserves from heroic donkey." The footage, expertly edited to show Vernon trespassing, Daisy's intervention, and the muddy aftermath, had already been viewed over 200,000 times. By noon, a local news van was parked at the end of Jack's driveway. The reporter, a young woman with a bright smile, asked if she could interview Jack and the famous Daisy. Other neighbors from the area began stopping by, sharing their own stories of run-ins with the HOA. "They tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of beige on my mailbox," one older man told the camera. "They sent me a warning letter because my grass was half an inch too tall," added a young mother. Back in Pinewood Estates, lights burned late in the Hargrove home. Regina's phone rang constantly as other HOA board members demanded emergency meetings. Through her window, she could be seen pacing and gesturing angrily as Vernon sat miserably on the couch, still picking mud from his ears. For a week after the HOA meeting, Jack tried to be reasonable. He sent emails with suggested compromises and even offered to help maintain the shared portion of the road. His messages went unanswered. Each morning, he drove cautiously along the disputed dirt path, a knot of worry growing in his stomach. Friday morning dawned with a golden sunrise that painted the fields amber. Jack filled his thermos with coffee, climbed into his truck, and headed out to feed the animals. As he rounded the bend toward the contested road section, he hit the brakes hard. A shiny red ATV was parked sideways across the narrow path, blocking any passage. A stocky man with a deeply tanned face and expensive sunglasses sat in the driver's seat. What made Jack's blood run cold was the hunting rifle resting casually across the man's lap, its metal barrel gleaming in the morning light. "Private property," the man announced with a smug smile. You'll have to find another way around. Jack recognized him from photos on the HOA website. Vernon Hargrove, Regina's husband, and the HOA's enforcement officer. This is the only practical access to my home, Jack said, keeping his voice calm despite his racing heart. My family has used this road for decades. Times change, Vernon shrugged. Board's decision is final. Jack considered his options. The rifle wasn't pointed at him, but its presence was clearly meant to intimidate. Making a scene could only make things worse. I need to feed my animals, Jack finally said, putting his truck in park and stepping out. Not my problem, Vernon replied, settling more comfortably into his seat. Jack had no choice but to unload the heavy feed bags from his truck and carry them one by one along the fence line, taking a half-mile detour to reach his barn. Vernon watched with obvious satisfaction, never offering to help as Jack made trip after trip under the warming morning sun. From her upstairs window across the way, Eleanor Wilkins observed the entire scene. Her arthritic fingers worked quickly, adjusting the settings on her professional camera, a leftover from her days as a nature photographer for National Geographic. She documented everything. Vernon's blocking position, the rifle across his lap, Jack's repeated journeys with heavy bags of feed. When Vernon finally drove away, Jack was exhausted and covered in sweat. He collapsed on his porch steps, wondering how things had escalated so quickly. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Got it all on camera. This isn't right, Jack. They'd gone too far this time. As Jack scrolled through the photos Eleanor had sent, he realized this was no longer just about a road. This was about standing his ground. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Jack Thornton was typing code at his small apartment in Seattle when his mother's voice cracked over the phone. Grandpa Joe had passed away in his sleep. Jack hadn't visited the old ranch in 5 years, always too busy with deadlines and projects. Now, somehow, Grandpa Joe had left him the entire 40-acre Thornton ranch. 3 weeks later, Jack drove his city-worn sedan down the dusty country road toward his new property. Tall pine trees lined the way, their branches swaying in the spring breeze. The familiar wooden sign, hand-carved by his grandfather decades ago, welcomed him home. Thornton Ranch, established 1943. The old farmhouse stood just as Jack remembered. Weathered white paint, wide front porch with the same creaky rocking chair. But it felt different knowing it was now his responsibility. Jack stepped out of his car, his designer shoes immediately coated with a fine layer of country dust. "You must be Joe's grandson," called a friendly voice. A woman in her 70s with a camera hanging around her neck approached from the neighboring property. "I'm Eleanor Wilkins. Been neighbors with your grandpa for 30 years. Eleanor helped Jack inside, where his grandfather's will and a handwritten letter waited on the kitchen table. The letter explained everything: how to feed the animals, which fields needed attention, and most importantly, the problem with the new neighbors. "Those fancy houses over there," Eleanor pointed through the kitchen window toward a row of identical large homes visible through the trees. "That's Pinewood Estates, built 2 years ago. Your grandpa and their homeowners association had some disagreements." Jack spent the rest of the day exploring his inheritance. He found 3 friendly donkeys in the barn who nudged his pockets for treats. 6 heritage pigs snorted happily in their spacious pen. A small herd of 12 cattle grazed peacefully in the backfield. Everything was well kept but simple. That evening, as Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, he noticed a shiny black SUV driving slowly past the property. The driver, a woman with perfectly styled gray hair, stared at the ranch with obvious disapproval before speeding away. The next morning, Jack found a letter in his mailbox. Official letterhead read Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. Inside was a formal complaint about the unsightly farm equipment visible from the road, with a $200 fine attached. Jack sighed as he looked at his grandfather's old but well-maintained tractor. So this was what Grandpa Joe had been dealing with. The city boy's country life was about to get complicated. Jack quickly settled into a routine at Thornton Ranch. Every morning, He woke at dawn to feed the animals before opening his laptop to work remotely. His software company had been surprisingly supportive about his sudden move. The fresh country air and peaceful surroundings even helped him focus better. That peace shattered when a thick envelope arrived in his mailbox. Inside was a formal letter on expensive paper bearing the gold-embossed logo of Pinewood Estates. Jack read it twice, his stomach tightening with each paragraph. "This can't be right," he muttered, spreading out an old property map on the kitchen table. The letter claimed that the dirt road he used to reach his ranch, the same road his family had used for 3 generations, crossed through a corner of subdivision land. According to their new survey, his grandfather's easement was no longer valid. The HOA demanded he stop using the road immediately and build a new access point. Jack walked outside and looked toward the only other possible entry, a densely wooded area that would cost a fortune to clear and pave. "They can't just cut off your access," Eleanor said when Jack showed her the letter. "Your grandfather fought this battle already. They're hoping you don't know any better." The following Tuesday evening, Jack put on his cleanest jeans and a button-up shirt to attend the monthly HOA meeting. The community center was filled with homeowners in expensive casual wear, all eyeing him suspiciously as he signed in. "We now address new business," announced a sharp-voiced woman at the front table. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her red blazer looked like it cost more than Jack's monthly rent in Seattle. The nameplate before her read, "Regina Hargrove, President." Jack raised his hand and waited to be recognized. When finally called upon, he explained the situation calmly, mentioning his family's long history and the established easement. Regina cut him off mid-sentence. The previous arrangements were informal and not legally binding. She said without looking up from her papers, "Our recent survey clearly shows the road crosses Pinewood property by 13 feet. The board has unanimously voted to enforce our boundaries. But that's my only reasonable access point," Jack protested. "That sounds like a personal problem, Mr. Thornton," Regina replied with a thin smile. "Perhaps you should have conducted better research before purchasing rural property." "I inherited it," Jack corrected. "Then perhaps your grandfather should have made better arrangements," she said, moving on to the next agenda item as if Jack had already left the room. As Jack walked out, a man in golf attire whispered, "Don't take it personally. Regina used to be a corporate lawyer. Running the HOA is her retirement hobby. She never loses." The emergency HOA meeting was packed. Homeowners who had never attended before filled every seat, with more standing along the walls. An empty chair at the head table spoke volumes. Regina Hargrove was notably absent. "She's at their lake house in Vermont," whispered a board member to another. "Said she needed time away from the hostile environment." Robert Chen, the vice president, called the meeting to order with visible nervousness. Jack sat quietly in the back row, having been formally invited by several board members. "We need to address the incident that has gained significant attention," Robert began cautiously. "The board recognizes that certain actions taken recently may have been overzealous." A homeowner stood up. "My kids' teachers showed them the donkey video in school yesterday. We've become a laughingstock." Another joined in. "I've had clients calling me about it. This affects all our property values." The meeting quickly turned to the road dispute. Maps were displayed, and the HOA's lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. After reviewing the historical documents, it appears the Thornton easement was, in fact, properly registered in 1967. The recent survey had measurement errors. Jack hid his smile as Robert proposed a formal agreement recognizing Jack's right to use the road. The document was already prepared, needing only signatures. "We're also prepared to cover the repair costs for the damage to Mr. Hargrove's vehicle," Robert added, looking pained. Jack raised his hand. "I appreciate that. But instead of paying me, would you consider donating that amount to the Mountain Valley Animal Rescue? That's where my grandfather got Daisy and the other donkeys." The motion passed unanimously. By the following week, the gate was gone, and Jack drove freely on his family's road. Vernon's ATV had been towed away, though the Hargroves themselves remained scarce, their home eerily quiet. One sunny morning, Jack was surprised to see a small group approaching his property, Robert and 3 other HOA members carrying gift baskets. "Peace offering," Robert explained, handing Jack homemade cookies and carrots for the donkeys. "We're also wondering if Daisy might be willing to appear at our community festival next month. The kids are asking for the hero donkey." Jack laughed and led them to the barn where Daisy watched them with curious eyes. She's a bit of a celebrity now. Even has her own social media page thanks to Eleanor. Life settled into a new rhythm at Thornton Ranch. Jack extended his remote work arrangement indefinitely. The pigs enjoyed their freshly rebuilt pen. New HOA leadership focused on community building rather than rule enforcement. And whenever a new family moved into Pinewood Estates, old-timers would point toward the ranch and whisper the cautionary tale of the donkey who took down an empire, a gentle reminder that good neighbors respect boundaries, especially when there are determined donkeys involved.